That's good.
Ja, og vi venter lige 1 minut, inden vi går i gang. Og det er jo dejligt at se alle jer som tilhører. Og vi har lige testet teknikken. Sådan er det jo, når man arbejder med systemtænkning og teknologiforståelse i bred forstand. Så skal man lige være sikker på, at teknikken også virker. Og det har vi rimeligvis styr på her. Ja. Ja. Og må ikke bare lige så stille og roligt, at vi skal starte op. Velkommen. Jeg starter lige på dansk, og så bliver det jo sådan, at oplæggene bliver på engelsk, fordi vi har en engelsk oplægsholder i blandt os. Velkommen til det her NICE webinar, som kommer til at handle om systemtænkning i naturfags og teknologifagene. Vi har 3 oplæg i dag. Det er sådan, at på tværs af internationale læseplaner, så anerkendes systemtænkning og systemtilgange i stigende grad som centrale for at hjælpe elever til at forstå kompleksitet og sammenhænge, både i naturfagene, men også i teknologiske systemer og socio-tekniske systemer. Alligevel så er systemtænkning fortsat vanskelig at undervise i, også at evaluere, og der er stadig spørgsmål om, hvordan man skal introducere det meningsfuldt i undervisningen på forskellige klassetrin. Senest har jeg selv oplevet at være over og være bedømmer på en Ph.D. i Sverige på Växjö Universitet, hvor Anna Perez, hun havde arbejdet med programmering i det svenske teknologifag, som afvikles i 4. til 6. klasse. Og en af hendes perspektiver, det var jo, hvordan systemtænkning kunne bruges i programmering. Det var rigtig interessant, og det var i øvrigt Jonas Hällstrom, som var vejleder blandt andet, sammen med Maria Svensson fra Göteborg Universitet. Det her webinar, det samler både forskere og praktikere, som vil præsentere aktuelt arbejde med systemtænkning. Der kommer nogle forskellige perspektiver, og jeg skal præsentere lige om et øjeblik, and I'll switch to English because one of our presenters is Leah Lavi from MIT, but also associated.
Thank you, and sorry everyone.
That's fine, Ria.
For doing this. I could join
welcome.
early, so I'm very sorry, but thank you so much for the invitation. Sorry.
Yeah. And Ria is also associated to Center for Problem-Based Learning at Aalborg University, where he collaborates with Løkke Bertel, and she's the one waving now, and she's also an associate professor at Aalborg University. With us today, we also have Jonas Hällstrom, professor of technology education at Linköping University. Jonas, can you wave just to, yeah. And Jonas will give the first presentation. With us, we also have, Mette is there, yeah, of course. And Mette is a student of Løkke Bertel, and she will give a practical introduction to how to work with system thinking in a Danish context. Mette is also a former STEM candidate student here in Denmark. Are you finished, Mette, or how is it? Yeah, you finished already. Yeah, so very nice, and welcome to you also. And Mette, what is your association? Where are you situated? In a school?
No, it's a small. I'm at a small non-profit organization called Mathematic Center at the moment.
Ah, okay, nice. So, welcome to all our presenters, and also welcome to our audience. And I think we are about ready to proceed for the first presentation. Jonas, are you ready to give a presentation about systems thinking in K-12 technology education?
Indeed, yes. I will try and share my screen here. Like that, and see if it works.
Yeah, it works on my screen, Jonas.
Do you see my, you don't see my first screen, so to speak, my second screen, I hope, right now.
We see your presentation.
Good,
but
good.
Not in a full screen
Not
mode.
in the full screen. Okay, yeah, that's always the problem. Let me start from the beginning. Like that, I think. Yeah, now it should be my full screen.
Now it's your full screen. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, yes. My name is Jonas Hällstrom, and I'm a professor of technology education at Linköping University, a couple of hours south of Stockholm in Sweden. And I'm very honored to be invited to this seminar to talk about technological systems and systems thinking. I don't remember, I think I was given this title, Systems Thinking in K-12 Technology Education, but it's very well suited to the study that I'm going to talk about. But I will begin with a short introduction, and then I will also end with some pedagogical implications, and also a model that we use when we talk about systems thinking in K-12. We'll see what you think about that one. Well, so yes, systems. Systems are often not readily apparent and sometimes even invisible. So in a sense, then some of my research has been geared at making the invisible visible in that sense. And students' knowledge of technological systems and systems thinking are closely aligned, I think. So that's why I'm going to talk about both systems and systems thinking, and also assessment of systems thinking today here in this presentation. But I'll begin here with what I think is a very good definition of systems thinking that also relates both to technology and engineering systems in a sense. And then there are all other kinds of systems thinking also in other areas, of course, biology, ecology, social sciences, etc. But I'll focus on the technological and engineering aspects of systems thinking. This is a definition from Gero et al. It's from the European Journal of Engineering Education, a very good paper, where they define systems thinking as the ability to A, see the whole system beyond the components, B, understand the function of the system without having access to all its details, C, identify interrelations between system components and their synergy, and D, take into account non-engineering factors, economic, organizational, etc., etc. And in most like socio-technical theories, this is sort of a given, but it's still an important definition, this one, I think. When we look at educational research, however, it shows that students in the school, and I'm thinking mostly about K-12 now, they have a basic understanding of input, process, and sometimes of output in a technological system. They understand the system's structure better than its behavior. if we take an example, they can, and this is from studies that I've done myself, they can understand well how the electric grid operates. In a sense, they know that there are power stations, there are power lines, etc., but they're not so good at identifying exactly what happens in the system that makes it work, so to speak. And that's also what I mean by making the invisible visible. They see the visible parts, but not so much the invisible flows of information and energy, etc., in a system. And the flow of information especially is very difficult to understand, for example, in feedback processes. We have found in studies, and there are many studies showing this. So, as I said, students tend to focus on the visible technology, that is familiar technological projects and objects, but not really on what happens inside these projects or systems that these are a part of. So as one of my colleagues in Linköping, he says the systems are in the shadow of the artifact, in a sense. We tend to see the artifacts. Even, for instance, an elevator, we see or students see, like the doors and all the buttons you press where you go, but they don't really understand what's going on in the system, what makes the elevator go from your level to level 3 when you press 3, for instance. But technology education also involves mechanisms, components, and parts of systems that are not immediately visible to the naked eye, such as gearboxes, circuit boards, radio waves, and feedback in technological systems. In that sense, technology is kind of a messy subject where you deal with products and systems, but the products are not only products, but they are also components and systems, and some processes are visible, some are invisible. So it's really a complex subject for students in K-12, I would say. So teaching needs to address what happens in and around a technological product or system. Students' knowledge about technological systems also needs to be studied in more detail, and it also needs to be able to be assessed in teaching. And more research about systems and systems thinking in K-12 needs to be carried out. There's been some research by myself and some other groups around the world, but not very much really. If we talk about technology and engineering education as part of STEM education, it's very limited, the amount of research that has been done. And assessment of students' technological knowledge is generally thereby a challenge for teachers. And that stems not only from the inherent complexity of technological knowledge, but which is in itself an obstacle, I would say, but also the subject of technology education has quite a short history, and the assessment practices are not very developed, I would say. And then technological systems as a curriculum component is also complex, underdeveloped, and under-researched. So there are many challenges to the notion of systems and systems thinking in technology education. So I will present here a study that we did a few years back, and which is published in this book. It's called Teaching and Learning About Technological Systems, that was published in 2022 on Springer. And if you want to know more about other groups studying the systems, technological systems in the school, it's good to look in this book. There are some research group other than our research group in Linköping that present their research in this book also. But we wrote a chapter called Investigating School Students' Knowledge about Technological Systems Towards Qualities of Knowledge. So we introduced the concept here, qualities of knowledge, and present results from an investigation of school students' knowledge about technological systems, where we hypothesize the occurrence of different qualities of knowledge. You can say that there are also progression steps in the knowledge about systems, or different depth of knowledge, you can also say. So it's maybe a start for looking at also assessment in technological systems understanding. A study of technological systems knowledge, systems thinking related to a learning progression or a potential learning progression in lower secondary education. And we, for this study then, with the concept of qualities of knowledge, it's not very common. I've almost not seen it anywhere else. So it's kind of a concept that we constructed ourselves to capture what we wanted to study. And we designed test instruments where we had hypothesized different qualities of knowledge or different progression steps in the understanding of technological systems. So that's the idea behind the study. So we defined qualities of knowledge as stages or phases in an increasingly complex knowledge or understanding of technological systems, basically. And what we did also was that when we had performed the study and did our final analysis, we also related these qualities or stages to the Solo taxonomy, the structure of observed learning outcomes, the Australian taxonomy, which I think was good for visualizing how well the students have progressed when it comes to knowledge about technological systems and systems thinking capabilities. So we adopted a definition of a technological system as a purposeful collection of components or subsystems, connections and flows between these components, and a system boundary that delimits the scope of the system. So that was a very basic definition of a system that we used. So based on this definition, we constructed test instruments to incorporate central aspects of systems knowledge, what we defined as such. So this was based on our prior research, but also on a corpus of theoretical literature about systems, all the way from Churchman through the 80s and the STS literature all the way till today. So it was like a very big reading that we put into this progression structure, at the same time as, of course, it's our understanding of what should be included in different stages of knowledge about systems. So we had 4 aspects here. The first one is system boundary and relation to the surroundings. And the simplest form of knowledge or quality of knowledge here would be to describe a boundary, and then the relation to the surrounding, and finally to relate it to other systems and even be able to compare systems with similar purposes, although they might look very different. Number 2, we define the purpose as of the system as a central aspect, and the easiest or simplest way of showing knowledge here would be to exemplify a purpose, and then to relate this purpose to humans and to society, and finally to use of resources, and then when the very final step would be to be able to identify several different purposes, for instance, with a system, which would be a much more complex system then. Number 3 is system structure and behavior, which you often need to model. You could exemplify components first, and then the relationship between the components, and then relate the components to system behavior. And the 4th level was to describe the system using a relevant model. And then finally, how changes to components or subsystems influence other components and subsystems and the overall purpose. So the last level is always quite complex, and the first one is quite easy. And the fourth one was resource flows in the system, and we here talk about energy, matter, or information. Those are the 3 things that can flow in the system: energy, matter, or information. So the first one would be to describe flows of matter, then describe flows of energy and or information, and next describe energy that flows and is used in the system, and the final one, describe information that is used in the system for control purposes. So that was the most complex one, and we know from previous research also that information flows are the most difficult to understand for students, so we needed to have that as the most advanced level. So we had an example of a house, and we also showed a picture of a house, a regular home where you live. And we showed in this image that there is an inflow or something, and there's an output also. And we asked questions about the freshwater system here. In the first question, what it's for, and then what important needs of the inhabitants of the house can the system fulfill. And the aspect, one of the 4 aspects that was tested with this was number 2, purpose. And then we asked about the purpose of the freshwater system for society, and that was still the purpose of the system, number 2, but in maybe on another level. And see how the freshwater system work, and then they also could draw to show their knowledge. So we had to also read and analyze their drawings when we analyzed the data for this study. And then also exemplify with some parts of the system you think are important and describe how these work together, so they could also like zoom in on certain parts of the system. So that C question was quite complex and actually included all 4 of the aspects. And the final one, does the freshwater system impact on the environment? If so, how? And we related that to the first aspect of system boundary. Yeah, so quite a complex study, and we had 56 students in grade 8 in Swedish compulsory school, which is grade 8 is a lower secondary education, so the first or second year really of secondary education. And altogether, 26 copies of the instrument were filled in by the students. And the students worked in pairs and groups or 3, so they could like cooperate on solving our questions. And we also wanted them to be able to do this. It's not a test, it's just an assignment that they do to learn, so they could take some time to fill it in. So it was approximately 45 to 60 minutes. Yes, and so in terms of findings from this study, that we actually worked quite hard with, but it's a qualitative analysis. Maybe I forgot to say that, but it's we did thematic inductive analysis to analyze all these, and we also analyzed images. Overall, so one can say that the students' qualities of knowledge regarding the overall structure was quite advanced. So they could, and you can see in some of the pictures I will show in a moment, that they, at least some of the students, have quite good knowledge about the structure, what that makes up the freshwater system. But it was not detailed, and the relation to the societal context was quite obscure for students. And the purpose of the system could be connected to humans and society, but the students did not offer a definition of the overall purpose. So this was one of the little bit contradictory findings from the study, actually. And I will show in a moment also our table that we made from the analysis. It's more visible there. And the flows that the students described were only of matter, water and wastewater, but not energy or information. So this is an example of a drawing from one of the student groups. So it's this is one of the better ones. You can see they have knowledge of water towers, subterranean water pipes, the fact that the water is pressurized and it reaches houses and apartments alike. And you also can see that that water comes from lakes. Yeah, so this is quite an advanced one. And this group also added some descriptions added to the drawing to just exemplify and describe what they are drawing. Here's another one that depicts, even though we didn't ask about the sewer system, it's about the sewer system. And it's also kind of a misconception, because they believe that the sewage go to the treatment plant and then it goes straight back to the freshwater tap you have in your home, which I think is a very common misconception, actually. I talked to a colleague the other day. He's not in science or technology education, but he actually thought that this is the way it works, just as in this image, that what we get from the wastewater treatment plant goes straight back to the tap you have in your apartment or house. So I had to explain to him that in fact the water from the wastewater treatment plant goes into the watercourse, and then somewhere else it's being picked up again, and it goes to a water treatment plant, and then it goes into your home. And he was quite surprised, actually. So many of the issues we have with systems thinking, especially in relation to technological systems, are actually not so age it doesn't differ so much between children and grown-ups. Many grown-ups, they show the same gaps in the knowledge about systems that children do. So it's a very complex subject matter actually in school. And the system boundary was elusive, except when you look at what goes out of the house. That was more tangible and easy for them to understand, and also environmental consequences and so on. So in some our test instrument that we did with the qualities of knowledge built in this house assignment, we think that in a sense it worked, and that it was possible to gauge in a sense, in a qualitative way, students' knowledge level or progression or qualities, especially regarding the system structure. We think it worked quite well. But the validity of this test must be improved, I think, with respect to some aspects, which I will show you. So we will look at this table that we did with the solo categories. So we have in the left-hand column, we have the aspects that I showed you: system boundary in relation to the surrounding, purpose of the system, system structure and behavior, resource flows in the system. And along the x-axis, if you will, you have the solo taxonomy with an increased level of abstraction, you could say, going from unistructural, multistructural, relational, to extended abstract. I think so. There's also an unstructural level, or level 0 in the solo taxonomy, but we chose to have these four. And the orange color, I think it's orange, or some kind of brown, but the ones, the boxes with the most color, there's where the most answers were defined as in our coding system. And the less color, the fewer codes for that box, so to speak. And we can see that, and this is the one I described above for the aspect 1. We had defined node boundary described as unistructural, described boundary as multistructural, and then relating the system beyond the boundary to the surroundings, to human society, nature, and other systems as relational. But we actually got more, they understood better according to our analysis, the relational level than the multistructural. So either we did our definition of that level wrong, or they could actually bypass that multistructural level and be able to relate to the surrounding while also not being that good at describing the boundary. So we're a little bit unsure about that. Yes, we have to think more about that before we move on with this study. But so at least in any way, however you define it, it's a validity problem with this test instrument. But otherwise, I think it's the rest of the qualities of knowledge here are quite, reasonable, and also they're also harmonize well with previous research also. For example, that they could as I said in the beginning, students are better at structure than behavior of a system. So it's also then quite natural that in aspect 3, relational, that there were not so many students that could relate components to system behavior, for instance. Yeah. But that first aspect, we have to look at the validity of this instrument. Yes. Finally, before I leave the floor to comments, I will just show you a model that we use with teacher students, and also with in professional development courses for technology teachers. We use this model that we call, I don't know what we call the model, but we call the line that the arrow points at, the systems horizon. So we believe that when we talk about technological systems, and even other systems perhaps, but the example here is technological systems with students and student teachers, we need to show them that there is a point when it is not fruitful to talk just about artifacts or products or single components, but we have to talk about the systems, and about a technological system, and we call that the systems horizon. So, and this is just an example. On the next slide here, the problem with the system horizon is that it's not a fixed line. It can depend. It depends on what kind of technology we're talking about. But generally, when we have something that has very few components and very simple connections, for instance, a stone axe, then we don't talk about the system generally, but we talk about a product or an artifact. But when we reach a little bit more complex technology with more components and more complex connections, the windmill, it's maybe not so complex connections, but quite many components. It might be fruitful around there to talk about a system. Definitely when we get to James Watts' steam regulator, maybe not so many components, but still quite complex connections. And we have this feedback loop I told you about earlier, is complex for students to understand. Then we may need to bring in systems concepts to help them sort this out, because it's a very counterintuitive way of thinking, the way a regulator works, perhaps for some students at least. And then we move on to more and more complex systems, and I actually also included here the environment or the climate as a wicked system. It's not a technological system, but it's an example of a very complex system that we often talk about as a wicked system. And I heard a researcher from Chalmers University. He had done like a typology of system complexity, and he talked about complicated, complex, and wicked systems. And at least according to him, technological systems are mostly complicated systems. And a complex system might be like a flock of birds, how they operate, and a wicked system that might be the whole environment, the whole climate. It's so complex that it's almost impossible to analyze. But there are, of course, examples of technology that take for instance an Airbus, is it A380 it's called, the world's biggest aircraft for passenger aircraft. I doubt there's one person who knows all the details, all the parts of this gigantic system. Still, it works, but it works only because we have a large organization of engineers and other people that can together comprehend the system. So, I mean, I think that verges on the complex, but anyways, we have, when we go like more to the right and up in this picture, we get more and more complex systems, and we need to be able to deal with them. But yeah, that's when we get to the climate, then maybe that's something for another discussion. But yes, that was my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonas, for enlightening us with this not simple model, but I would say to clarify some of the concepts that relates to systems thinking. Jonas, can I ask you to release the screen just that I can see everybody?
Yes.
Thank
Like that. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to ask if there are any comments or questions for Jonas. Otherwise, I can start by asking Jonas, and then maybe, okay, yeah, we have Vasim. Would you like to ask a question or comments?
Yes, frankly, I document here 2 questions. First, many thanks for the presentation. And my questions, the first question is about student knowledge. Are there any research questions related to the relation between student system knowledge and other form of knowledge? How this relation can be understood?
That's a very good question.
Yes, and the other questions about student technology teachers. How are there any questions also related how the teachers can handle this social acceleration? I come from software engineering domain, and I can understand quickly this acceleration, very fast technology acceleration, and how this acceleration phenomena can be approached by those teachers.
Yes, if I take the first question, I don't think for K-12, but I've seen at least in higher engineering education, that was the first article I cited in the beginning, that definition of systems thinking. Gero et al., they found a correlation between systems thinking and abstract thinking. So, and that's very exciting, I think, because it's very hard to pinpoint exactly what kind of thinking systems thinking is. So, but they did that study, and I think that's very fascinating, that correlation they found there in that article. Otherwise, for K-12 level, I'm not sure. I haven't seen any studies on that, actually. And then as regards to teachers, that's also very scarce, that research. I think we've done some studies on student teachers, and also a couple of studies where we interviewed and also had a survey sent out to teachers in lower secondary, also I think, about systems thinking and how they assess systems, technological systems knowledge. But that's about it, I think. There's an American researcher at MIT, John Sterman. He has done some research about systems thinking more broadly speaking, both in like middle school and I think high school, but also at higher engineering institutions about, I think that's more general systems thinking capabilities. And they also have designed like a systems concept inventory and a series of tests that you can do to like assess system thinking. But in my view, for K-12, they are a bit too advanced and also a bit too general. But what they actually might do is that they might relate to this more abstract thinking that this other article found a correlation with. So it might be that they could be developed, but yeah. So, but just for technology teachers, I haven't seen anything really that's been like related to technological systems in that sense.
Okay, thanks.
Jonas, I have a comment because you started by formulating that it's about making the invisible visible, and I was thinking about this as a didactical question, which is how can we make the invisible visible for students, for K-12 students? And I actually think that is the main challenge for teachers to think about how to visualize how resources flow in a system. You use these three terms either as energy, matter, or information that flows.
Yes.
But I think that the real challenge in a teaching learning situation is how to use different ways to visualize this. From your study, you were having a dialogue with the students, as I could hear it. But when you're a teacher in a Danish classroom with 24 students, it's very difficult to have time for dialogues with everybody. So we need somehow to create visualization tools to help teachers to help students to visualize systems. I think how to make the invisible visible.
Yeah, and there's research about visualization and so on, and they often like visualize things that you can't see, like nanoparticles and such. And this is invisible in another sense, I think. But it's still something that you may be able to visualize. For example, in a dome, for instance, with a movie about systems or something. I am just riffing here, but but that's, I think that's a very interesting point with the visualization, and it could be images, it could be computer simulations and whatever.
Exactly.
You need some kind of a tool to help in visualizing
in that process.
Systems.
Thank you, Jonas. Søren, you have a question or comment?
It's more a comment, and it was in line with your comment, Martin. As you probably know, I have a strong working community with our colleague Mette, and we have worked a little bit with climate changes, and as you just said, Jonas, it's a very complex system actually, and we have thought about we call them anchor points as helping tools for making our teacher students more aware of what's going on here. it was kind of helping them to understand such a complex system. And it was concepts like time, numbers, concentration, reversibility, scale, and circulations of matter. And that's really helped them to understand such complex systems. So
Yeah.
focusing on so-called anchor points or what's in the heart of going on here, helping them very much. So it's just a comment. It's more or less like yours: purpose, boundary, structure, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. It's also kind of a way of modeling the system, and then you can choose something to focus on, because a model can simplify something that's very complex, and you can pick the right level and the right concept to focus on. Yes, I agree.
Thank you, Søren. Now it's time to close the presentation from Jonas. Thank you, Jonas. I think it was a very well-structured and clear presentation, and thank you for making our thinking going on now. Now we need to take a 5-minute break to get coffee or something else. We will start again at 2 minutes to 3, or maybe 3 o'clock. We will start again, and then we will hear from Løkke Bertel and Ravi about the SAFO model. So see you at 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we hope that behind all these black screens, there's a lot of participants now. Mette is also here. Hi, Mette.
Hi.
Hi. And Lars is here also. Hi, Lars. Yes, well, it's not 3 o'clock yet, but Ria, are you in Boston or are you in Aalborg?
I'm in Boston. I would love to be in Aalborg, but I'm in Boston right now.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks for asking.
Okay, and now we are back it's 3 o'clock, and we are ready for the second presentation given by Dr. Ria Lavi and from Massachusetts, MIT. It is the better name, the short name in Boston, and Løkke Bertel from Aalborg University, and they have collaborated about the SAFO model as a didactical model for systems thinking. And they will talk about potential and challenges about using this SAFO model as a didactical model. So Løkke and Ria, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I'll start by giving the word to you, Ria, to introduce SAFO, and then I'll add some examples as well at the end. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Bertel, and I appreciate the invitation very much. It's a great honor to tell you a little bit about this framework. And by the way, the word Massachusetts is a word that I practiced 20 or 30 times before I came to MIT, and that's the only reason why I can pronounce it.
Okay.
It's the one word that I had to make sure I can pronounce. But yeah, it's a tough one.
But it's in a beautiful city. So.
Oh yeah, New England is beautiful. Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Very nice area, especially now the winter is over and everything is green and flowering.
Exactly.
So this will be indeed a brief presentation. Obviously, we cannot cover everything, and I would like to thank the previous speaker for covering so much of the theory, of the systems theory, and allowing me to sort of skip directly to talking about the framework. And there are really a lot of a lot of similarities even in the terms that are used and so on. So that's actually, I think, very encouraging to see that there is some convergence. So first, I want to start with the why. Why was the Sappho framework, and I will explain what Sappho means in the next slide. But why was Sappho even needed and designed? I think that's very important to say, because there are other frameworks out there for teaching systems thinking, of course, let alone for system design, system evaluation, analysis, and so forth. I was given the task of teaching a first-year class at MIT. And in the first year at MIT, students are still not in their majors. They choose their major at the end of their first year. So a first-year, first-semester student could become a biological engineer or a physicist or a computer scientist. We don't know. And I was supposed to teach a class that would introduce them to ways of thinking and ways for solving problems. And systems thinking being my focus since my PhD, I figured, okay, I'll teach them systems thinking. Let's see what's out there for specifically novices. So people who are just out of high school. And when you look at these bullet points, a framework that's discipline agnostic, in this case across STEM, appropriate for novices, based in literature, as the previous speaker mentioned. Of course, these frameworks, these approaches are not born out of thin air. They're not 100% novel, and they shouldn't be. They should, of course, they contain some novelty because they're new, but they should certainly also be based on previous studies and thoughts and theory. Scalable and cost-effective, very important. We were just talking about the challenges that instructors face in teaching systems thinking. And what I call time-effective, meaning putting in the time that you have, which is not a lot of time in the case of instructors, and still being able to teach it to an acceptable level. Adaptable to a wide variety of learning assignments. That's also very important. Enabling both assignment and assessment design. I was very surprised when I was surveying the existing frameworks to see that quite often it wasn't the case that whatever method or framework or construct was used to teach systems thinking, it wasn't always the case that one could easily create assignments as well as assess them using the same construct or the same framework. And finally, it needs to introduce the basics of systems thinking comprehensively. So what do we mean by the basics of systems thinking? Because there is no claim with this particular framework that it touches on every aspect of systems thinking. As someone who has worked on teaching systems thinking to system engineers who are doing a graduate course in system engineering, I know full well that it's an ocean of knowledge and there is so much to teach, but we have to start somewhere. So it needs to be simple, but not simplistic. And this is just an overview of the publications that have been out so far. The last two were with Professor Bertel, and as you can see, involved AAU, Aalborg University students. They all had all these studies that has empirical elements, really focusing on evaluating the efficacy of the framework and validating the framework as well as the various assessment rubrics that are involved. So I know that's important to Professor Bertel as well. And also, it's been applied in the active learning settings, in the case-based learning setting. So again, I'm going to sort of whiz through some of these slides, but I'll be more than happy to provide them and so on. So here is the actual construct for Sappho. And again, as you can see on the title, it says Introductory Systems Thinking, and that's very important. This is not a framework that I would give engineers in a company who want to design a system. That's not to say it won't be useful in any way, but that's not the intent of the framework. The intent of the framework is to introduce systems thinking to complete novices who never heard the term systems thinking, which, by the way, most of my students have never even heard the term. And the few who have, each one gives me a completely different definition, which is usually at least half wrong. So it's meant for them. So first we have our system of interest, and we have to pick what that is. For example, I could take this pen. If you can see this pen, because I can't see myself, that's our system of interest. Architecture. So that's what is this made up of? and how do these parts interact. The function is what the system actually does, which involves the interface with the boundary entities. So interaction with the hand, interaction with the surface that you're writing on, all of that needs to interact in a certain way in order for the system to actually deliver its function. And finally, we have the outcome. How does all of this actually affect people? Why do we care that the pen can do this? What problem does it solve or need or demand? And what positive and even negative effects can it have on people? And this framework is based on many sources, but most of them pertain in some way or another to system engineering, and even specifically some of them very inspired by model-based systems engineering, which again, we don't have time to go into, but I'll be more than happy to discuss that with anybody who's interested later. So just a quick explanation, and I'm using very much a simplified, this is the first example that I give students, and it's purposely simplified. The important thing here, by the way, I should say at the top, focus on the essential system elements, meaning the previous speaker also mentioned this, and the person who asked the question, the idea of abstract thinking. In systems thinking, we are not looking to detail every single element and every single interaction in the entire system. We are trying to focus on the essential elements. And that's actually a big part of the difficulty of systems thinking, is focusing on the gist and not on everything else, and figuring out what the gist is. So if we take, again, a very simplified example with 5 parts, 4 interactions, and again, it can be matter, energy, or information. So architecture answers the question of what is the system. So we have structure and behavior. And as you can see, system architecture is very much taken from the lingo of systems engineering. And as you can see, in this particular example, we use mechanical interactions to describe how the architecture of a bicycle works. Next, we move on to the function of the bicycle. I'm using different colors here just to denote how this works. By the way, I used canva.com. They have a free tool, which is an infinite grid, and you can create diagrams there. But of course, you can use PowerPoint, Google Slides, even pen and paper. Luca and I did a workshop in a previous conference in South Africa with instructors where they did this on pen and paper. So what are we showing here in the function? We're showing the boundary entities. We're showing the inputs and the outputs into our system. And this what actually makes the function possible. So the bicycle is useless without the human cyclist and without somewhere for the wheels to roll on, a suitable surface. Now, of course, we could debate and argue whether the architecture as I described it is completely correct, whether I didn't miss out on a really important part, and so on. Same goes with inputs and outputs. You could say, well, there are other inputs that you haven't considered, other outputs, or you could say the human cyclist also receives output from the bicycle and so on. But this in itself is a very interesting discussion for the students to have, or for us to have with the students. So it's not all about just the correctness of the mapping, but it's also about being able to have those discussions using, again, really just block and arrows diagrams, but everything is well defined. And finally, we have the outcome. How does the system function affect people? And here we have 2 sub-components. We have the purpose of the system, which are the stakeholders that have some kind of a problem or a demand or a lack of something. And we have the benefit that the system provides, the system function provides. And it's kind of a triangle. And the benefit of the system, or the benefits, there could be more than one, is sort of a mirror of the problem. It's an inverse of the problem. And finally, and this is something that sometimes we neglect, not in sustainability education, but in engineering education, it's the idea of the trade-offs, the idea of the detriments. Anytime we solve a problem by creating an artifact, a system, a product, a service, a policy, what have you, we are also causing either new problems or exacerbating existing ones. It could be other stakeholders that are affected. Maybe we're not even aware of them. But students and people in in industry and in education, of course, as well, have to be cognizant of the fact that every system doesn't only solve a problem, hopefully, but also exacerbates or causes new ones. And then we have to pick whether the trade-off is worth it. What are the values that we are pitting against each other? And this is, of course, where ethical thinking comes in. So again, we've got the system of interest, we've got the architecture, which is the structure and behavior, the function, which is the inputs and the outputs, and the outcome, which is the system purpose and the detriments that it might cause. So as you can see here, this is an example of how one could describe the system outcome of this particular system. And this is very much within the context of Cambridge, Massachusetts. There are a lot of cyclists here, but if you took the bicycle, let's say in a city in China or Amsterdam, for example, I know there's a lot, in Aalborg as well, I know a lot of people are cycling there. You might come up with different stakeholders, different problems, and so on. That's perfectly fine. Again, that's part of the discussion. But the idea is to focus within the context on what do you think is the most important. And as you see here at the bottom, and this is a bit of system engineering speak, but as you can see, you can absolutely have this discussion as well with this, the value of the system, which needs to be positive, otherwise no point in designing the system. If the value is 0 or negative, it means the system either should not exist, we should improve it, or we should not design it, a new one. It's the benefits that the system provides minus the structure, because that costs resources and money to build, the structure, which is in the architecture, the parts, minus the detriments. So those are the trade-offs. And here, what I've done here is zoom out. The previous speaker also spoke about zooming out. What I've done here, as you can see, I took this function and I made that into the system of interest. So now that is the architecture. And now I have to think about, okay, what are the boundary entities of this particular, when I've zoomed out, of this new architecture? So I could say, well, there's the bicycle retailer that sells the bicycles, and the output is that the cycling lane interacts with the car lane. And now that introduces no longer the perspective of, let's say, somebody who makes bikes or somebody who fixes bikes, which is the previous one. Now we're coming at it from the point of view of someone who's selling bikes, or even somebody who is planning transportation, in charge of transportation in a municipality, for example, and they have to consider how cyclists will interact with car drivers and so on and so forth. So the idea is that you can zoom out and zoom in. If you take, for example, the smartphone as a system of interest, you can zoom into the processor within the phone, make that the architecture, and the boundary entities around it will be other systems within the phone. Or you can zoom out and treat the users and the phone as part of a bigger system and look at things like smartphone addiction. So the zooming out and zooming in is actually quite easy and straightforward once you understand this. And I'm not going to go through this example. This is just to show you how versatile the framework is. This is a completely different type of system. This is a coal-fired power plant. And again, exactly the same principles of architecture, function, outcome. And again, these are very simplified. Usually when I give this to students, I ask them to have 7 to 9 parts, not just 4 or 5. I ask them for 2 or 3 inputs, 2 or 3 outputs, and so on. But actually, I do want them to focus, so I don't give them, a huge number. And I want to show you a couple of real-world examples. And again, I will just whiz through these, but you can take your time later to look at them. So this was an actual competition that we ran, and the presentations were last month, so it's fresh. And these are MIT undergraduate students, some first years, but not only. And as you can see at the top, this is the challenge description that we're given, which relates certainly to sustainability education. The competition was about food waste at MIT and how we can potentially reduce it or eliminate or prevent it, and so on. And there's all kinds of food waste. There's overconsumption, there's putting things in the wrong bins, problems with recycling and so on. Now the students, of course, I taught them very briefly, 1 hour info session about the framework. And as you can see, they use their own colors and shapes and so on, but it's basically a very clear kind of blocks and arrows diagram. This was actually the winning team in terms of adhering to the rules of the framework, how correct the description of the challenge was, and how viable the solution was. What you're seeing here is just the challenge. It's just a description of the challenge using Sappho. And they were given resources, sources of knowledge, of information, data. We did this with the Department of Facilities and Office of Sustainability at MIT, this competition. So they actually gave us the challenge descriptions and so on, and some sources. And this is the solution that the team suggested. So again, I'm not going to go through it, but it's just to show you that just at a glance, the format is exactly the same, which is nice because it makes it so much easier when you want to judge the correctness and viability and so on, that what the students are sending you is all in the same format, using the same syntax, the same sort of logic and so on. The content, of course, can be completely different. So you can use Sappho to either describe or prescribe a system. The process would be different. If you're describing a system, you start with the architecture. So you start by describing the pen, and then the inputs and outputs, and then the outcome. If you're designing a new system, you do it the opposite way. You think, what outcomes do I want to achieve, and so on. The detriment always comes last, because that's when you have to think about the trade-offs. But other than that, one is the inverse of the other. And there are other potential applications of Sappho. And I have to say that every time I speak to someone new about it, not every time, but many times, they offer something or come up with something that I haven't even thought of. I now think of this framework kind of as a spokes and wheel model where you can sort of plug in things on top of it. So one thing that Luke and I actually did, and we're working through that data, is connecting systems. And this was, I believe, with graduate students, or at least some of them are graduate students at Aalborg. And they were connecting their different projects from different disciplines using this framework, looking for shared boundary entities and so on, and learning about each other's projects that way and communicating across disciplines, which was very interesting. Another one is the possibility of adding system dynamics. So this is, again, introductory systems thinking. System dynamics is certainly more advanced, but still you can add that on top if you wanted to do that, which is something that we've just begun exploring. And finally, there is, and I mentioned this briefly before, is this idea of perspective taking. So you can take a perspective, zoom in, zoom out, take the perspective of a boundary entity, make that into the system of interest, shift back and forth, and look at the same problem or system or scenario from different perspectives. Again, using the same format. And the last part, I wanted to briefly talk about assessment, which is extremely important, and specifically feedback. So students are working through this. When students work through any assignment, doesn't matter whether they're systems thinking or they're learning Newton's second law of motion. There's two aspects to what they're doing. One is adherence and one is correctness. Adherence is about, are they following the rules or the guidelines of the assignment? Am I doing this right? Which is perhaps the most common question from students. Correctness is about, am I doing the right thing? Is what I'm writing actually valid? These are two different things. And we have separated the two in terms of having two separate assessment rubrics for Sappho. And something we are working on right now, we are finding out that generative AI is very good. I would claim at least as good as a person overall, especially since people get tired once they have to go through 100 responses. Very good, actually, at giving feedback on adherence. It doesn't mean it never gets anything wrong, but I believe it gets things wrong as much as a person does, if not less. Correctness is a completely different story. You have to have a verified source of truth. A lot of times, it's really the internet or whatever, a lot less reliable in that regard. So separating the two. I'm going to skip this. This is just the rules for adhering to the framework, which you can change based on the assignment. You can play around with this based on the assignment. So Luke and I have actually created a prompt which allows students, instructors, and so on to feed a system description and immediately get feedback on whether it's following the rules of Sappho or not. And you can actually access it and play around with it if you want. And you can also create assignments. So I didn't know this was recorded, but since it is, you can always look at it later and just check out the QR code. And if you're interested to go through it with me, please let me know. And that's it. There are some the publications, of course, and more in progress. And that's it for me. And I'm sorry already for how fast everything was, but I wanted to make sure not to take up too much time.
That's great, Rhea. I'll just share a couple of examples of application, just so to give you a bit of inspiration here. I hope you can see my screen. See if I can go in presenter mode.
We see the screen.
Yes, so I'll be quick about it, so there's also time for questions. But just to give you a little bit of some situational contextual examples here, and especially when it comes to project and problem-based learning, but also working across disciplines, because I think Jonas was touching on this as well. Systems thinking is not an only engineering thinking skill. It's something that goes across all disciplines really, and has emerged sort of simultaneously across natural systems, sociological systems thinking, and then technological. So I think what I was really curious about is, can we use this framework to create sort of a shared language, common shared language between disciplines to talk about systems and their impact on people, but also on other natural systems. So I'll just share a couple of examples. I won't go too much into detail about what SAFO is, because you know that, but just to give a bit of context. So at Aalborg University, students work in projects. They spend about half their time across their entire education in projects, and in discipline-specific projects mostly. We're starting to have system projects now across many different educations, but for many years it's been mostly in the disciplines. And of course, when we work with first-year students, they don't really have a discipline yet. They're still sort of figuring it out. Even if they've chosen one, they don't really know that much. So that can be a challenge, of course. But we want to introduce systems thinking from the beginning, so it's not an add-on at the end, but something that's integrated in the way they think about problems and problem solving. They also do this in teams, so that also means they have to negotiate, they have to discuss and develop this understanding together, and that can be a challenge as well. Both, how do we assess this when it's in teams and it's a thinking skill? How do we make it explicit and something that students can discuss, for instance, through modeling? And it also makes it difficult to sort of organize the assignments around it. So that's something that we've explored. As Rhea mentioned, we've developed a rubric. I think we're happy to share that as well if you'd be interested in trying it out. I think that could be really interesting to see, does it work also in teacher education? Does it work in other contexts in K-12? And specifically in the examples I'll share here, I'm also focusing on, can it facilitate a fruitful dialogue between disciplines, which is really the core of my research. So I'll give two examples. One is in the first year course that it was also in Rhea's slides, one of the examples there. It's from chemistry and bioscience. It's a course that runs with both students from biology, biotechnology, chemistry, chemical engineering, and environmental science. So you both have Kensky and engineers in the same space, which is always interesting. There's a lot of interesting conversations going on. And it's part of a PBL course. So they are sort of learning a lot of other things related to problem solving and problem design and things like that as part of this course. So we introduced SAFO as a way to map a system, but also as a way to connect systems and discuss systems and sort of negotiate sort of what are the detriments and how does it relate to my discipline and so on. And some of that sort of emerged organically, which I found really interesting. So it was sort of an add-on that we hadn't thought of, that the students themselves were bringing up, realizing that, oh, as a biologist, I'm more concerned about the boundary, which is this type of squid that lives in this specific area where this new deep sea mining is happening. And as a biologist, I would be very concerned about that. And I thought that was a really interesting reflection, especially in the first year course. So I think this is really interesting that Jonas was already highlighting that the students struggle with output. I think we saw that as well in our in the results, and I'll share the paper with so we can share that after. They were struggling with output and also sometimes confusing output with outcome. So like, what is the benefit or what is the purpose of the system? So that was one thing that was interesting to see across the different disciplines. And also that specifically for adherence, they also scored lower on detriment compared to benefit. except for environmental science. So they were also a little bit different in some other areas. And then for the qualitative observations, so as I mentioned, the students became aware of their discipline in this collaboration with others in comparing and connecting systems. And we also found that when they were describing the system, they were quite similar. They were working with the same system. So it was when they were discussing the outcome, the problem, the stakeholders, the detriment, and the benefits that you could really see, okay, this is biotechnology students we're talking about, or this is environmental science students. So I thought that was also quite interesting. And the final example, well, this is actually a long-term one, so it involves many instances of data collections that we're looking into. But it's a series of workshops that we've been running as part of an initiative that focuses on professional skills in general, and systems thinking is part of that. And we've run this workshop, I think around, I don't even know, like 30 times with 500 students or something like that now. So we have quite an idea about how it works. But I'll just share here what we did in the spring, this spring in 26. So the students here, they are from many different disciplines, so not just bioscience and chemistry, but also it's all STEM students though. In this particular case, we want to extend it to also include SSH and health, but for now it's STEM students. But they're introduced to the framework, and then we go through a case together, and it's something on campus. So they go pick a system and we model it together. But then they apply the system or the Sappho framework to their own projects that they're working on in that semester. And then we mix them up across disciplines and have them connect their systems. And they do that in different ways. So one thing is zooming out, as Rhea was mentioning. So zooming out and seeing, okay, how far do we need to zoom out to connect these two systems? So maybe you're working with batteries for bikes, and maybe I'm working with tectonic plates in something. You know, how can that connect? How does that feed into each other? And it becomes complex very fast, but it's also quite fun actually for the students to explore these boundaries. Sometimes you even need multiple boundary systems before you can really connect the system. This year, and that's a new thing that we also mentioned, that we are also introducing system dynamics. And that's very complex also for the students to do in one workshop. So, but we're trying it out to see how we can do this in a way so it's pedagogical and it's introductory. And then at the end, we also look into a little bit about system innovation. So how can we use other systems outside our own context to innovate and rethink systems in our practice. So this is the final slide from me, and I'm happy to share materials and things we've developed if it could be interesting to you. But what we really see is that Sappho can help create a language for students to interact across disciplines, and they also become aware of the limitations in their own discipline, which is quite difficult for engineering students, I would say. So that's nice to see that they can see, oh, actually, maybe I should ask someone in health instead of just assuming. That's kind of nice. And the zooming in and out is part of that. And they realize, oh, actually, any problem that we've tried to address is complex. If you just zoom out far enough, any problem, even a very simple one, will become very complex. And the math students, they realize that, which is also quite nice. And then the horizontal thinking part. So how can I get inspiration from different fields to think differently about my system? We use some analogies here. We use some other systems to give them inspiration to think about their own project in a systems way. And then finally, this interdisciplinary appreciation of other perspectives, perspective taking. I think the Sappho framework can help with that, because it's not about negotiating what the problem is. It's realizing that all problems are really interconnected. So yeah, so I think that's it for me. I'll stop sharing here, so we can take a few comments maybe before mid.
Yes, thank you, Løkke and Rhea. Do we have any questions or comments? Otherwise, okay, Wasim, yeah.
Yes. Frankly, thanks for the presentation. I have questions. If I understand correctly, this framework is about first-year students' experience, correct or wrong understanding?
I have used it with first year, yes, but I've also used it with other bachelor students. I've used it with master students. I've used it with teachers. And I think, and Mette is going to give an example in a moment where you can use something similar with third graders. So I do think it has the potential to be used across many different, yeah.
Okay. Then my question is about first-year students' experience. And the question is, if I, as teacher, has many diversity of the students' worldview about the systems, okay? How can I use this framework to respond for this diversity? How can I serve this diversity? Because frankly, many students come with different worldview and they have system in their minds, but the problem how the teachers can understand these different worldview and put it in framework that can be helpful for the majority of them, or
Yes.
at least the interest of them.
Yes.
Is there any case study can be helpful?
I'll add one. I'll add one comment, and then Rhea, you can add if you think. Because I think actually, in some ways, if I tie this back to what Jonas was talking about with making the invisible visible, in a way, when the students are asked to map the outcome, like the purpose and who are the stakeholders and what are the benefits and detriments, you sort of get an insight into their thinking and their worldview. So are they thinking about the environment as a stakeholder or not? Or do they think about the human user as part of the system or as a boundary? That's also quite important. So it sort of gives you a snapshot of their thinking. And they also, if you have them do the mapping individually first, you also can facilitate a dialogue between the students, because then they will look completely different, even if they're working on the same system. So I do think that any type of modeling where you ask students to express these worldviews in a way that is comparable between them, then they can have these conversations. I don't know, Rhea, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I mean, that I totally agree with all of that. And just a couple more things. First, with your first question, Wasim. So originally, as I explained in my first slide, this was designed for engineering novices. That was just the immediate need that I had. What I found with time speaking to colleagues, and Luke has been a great supporter in that, is I realized, oh, this can have a wider potential, because actually people are looking, not just first-year students or those who teach them, are looking for something where how to introduce systems thinking. And I ended up teaching a graduate course for system engineers, and these are people who work in industry. So they already using very advanced methodologies and so on. And I received very positive feedback as well, because it was, again, a tool for thinking through things for them. It's not to design a system that's going to pass all the regulations and all the tests, but very straightforward way that you can learn quite quickly and then start playing around with it. Now, about your second question, I think, and the previous speaker mentioned this as well, the concept of the system boundary is very difficult. It's not just for students, it's difficult full stop. And I think the heart of the discussion of systems thinking, and really, ultimately, if I had to boil down what systems thinking is about, is where do you place those two boundaries? So that's the boundary around your system of interest, the architecture, and the boundary around the function. Outside of that boundary, there's the rest of reality, the rest of the world that we're ignoring. So where do we place those boundaries? And as Luca mentioned, if I asked you to say, okay, create a Sappho diagram or describe this using Sappho, so architecture, function, outcome, none of the diagrams will look exactly the same. And if I take a more complex system like this thing, it will look even more different. So a lot of the what you were talking about there was same about different worldviews and so on really relates to where do people put the boundaries. And then, as Luca mentioned, how do they describe the outcome? If you had to focus on just what is the key problem this system is designed to solve, what are the 2 or 3 main benefits that it provides, the answers are probably not going to be the same for different individuals. And then they can discuss why that is and actually begin discussing that. So it allows a standardized, replicable, scalable way of having those discussions. It doesn't give you the answer, of course, nor should it, but I
Yeah,
think it does allow
I
you to
can
ask better
understand.
questions in a more
Yes, but
precise way.
frankly, my settings or my problem, because this language, okay, it's not my language as teacher, but the language of the students. So the students maybe also have a form of language or a framework, but they can't express it. And I tried my best, okay, to structure their idea in systematic way or in framework that help these students express themselves freely and democratically. Okay, not imposing from me, but from them. But it doesn't work for me because I have a very complex diversity. So there are different culture, different worldview, language, culture, psychological. It's very complex situations.
Well, I mean, I for one would be happy to, try it out and see if it can help. But certainly, it is a big challenge, and
It's a
I
big
don't
challenge,
think that
yes. But if
Luke and I
understand
would
your
claim
framework,
that necessarily this is a solution. But maybe it's a good way of facilitating those discussions, potentially.
I understand. Thanks.
Thank you, Wasim. Jonas, the final question for the presenters.
Yeah, thank you, Luke and Ria. Very interesting presentation. I just have one comment or observation. I think what you mentioned, Ria, the boundary for the architecture and the boundary for the function. I think when people confuse those two, that's where a lot of misconceptions about systems originate, actually. So that's a very, very important distinction. The boundary for the function versus the boundary for the architecture. That's very, very important. But I was also going to ask if you have publications that it will be very interesting to read, because there's so many similarities with the study I had done and some other studies also. So that would be great to get.
So I believe the last slide I showed in the recording has the full references.
Oh,
currently
great.
There are three public, and of course you always feel free to email me or Professor Bertel, but
yeah,
we're also working currently and so on. So, more on the way.
Yeah, thank you. Perfect.
Okay, thank you, Luke and Rea, for your presentation and for the very good dialogue we have here. I know we're a little bit over time, but I think I think that the dialogue is very interesting to follow. So, Mette, in 5 minutes, I think we will start with you. We have a little bit of buffer in the end, so I think we are okay with. We will take a short break and then come back at 3:45.
Okay, and the presentation will be in Danish.
Of course,
sorry.
yeah, we know. Yeah, we know. Yeah. Ja, godt.
Ja.
Jamen Mette, du vil fortælle lidt om, hvordan man kunne arbejde med systemtænkning i naturteknologi i 3. klasse. Det
Lige
glæder
præcis.
vi os rigtig meget til at høre.
Det var godt. Ja, nu skal vi ud i virkeligheden. Og vi skal lige have det her til at virke. Ja, vi skal ud i en 3. klasse i en dansk folkeskole.
Og det ser fint ud, Mette.
Yes. Jeg kan ikke få lov til at skifte slide, Lykke. Sådan. Ja, ganske kort. Først så skal I introduceres for den virkelighed, der var ude i 3. klasse. Så skal det handle lidt om kombinationen mellem systemtænkning og teknologisk dannelse, og hvordan man så kan tage den her kompetence hos elever og planlægge undervisning der giver mulighed for at udvikle den, og hvordan man kan observere den. Og så skal I have et konkret eksempel på undervisningsmateriale. Så samler vi op, og så er der 2 refleksionsspørgsmål til sidst. Men det her projekt var en del af kandidatstudiet, som jeg lavede med 2 medstuderende, og Lykke var vores vejleder på projektet. Og projektet handler om teknologisk dannelse, men det kom ret hurtigt til at kredse om systemtænkning. Og det I skal starte med at høre, det er en brainstorm, som foregik mellem en lærer, Rasmus, og hans elever, hvor det går op for eleverne, hvordan de kan lege med systemet, altså transportsystemet omkring skolen, ved at komme med alle mulige forslag til, hvordan man kan ændre det. Så det skal I lige høre.
Man så sætter krydser på, hvornår man cykler i skole, og hvornår man ikke gør.
Så sådan en tavle, der viser, hvor mange gange man cykler i skole?
Ja.
Kan man kalde det en cykelpointtavle?
Ja.
Hvad kan man kalde det?
Og så har jeg sættet præmie til sidst i start. Sælge sko ikke så dyre, så mennesker vil mere købe dem, og så hvis man er rigtig glad for dem, så vil man mere gå med dem.
Billigere sko. Billigere gode sko. Yes.
Vi kunne fjerne det,
Fedt, mand! Yes! Det er en løsning, ikke? Vi fjerner parkeringspladserne, mand. Ikke? Fjerner p-pladsen.
Men det skal vi så komme i skole.
Så vil jeg cykle. Ikke? Løst. Ikke? Yes!
Vi skal fjerne busstopstedet.
Vi fjerner busstopstederne også. Nu er vi i gang. Yes. Hvad? Man kan lukke for tankstationerne. Ja? Vi lukker tankstationer. Lukker tanken, du.
Ja, det vender jeg tilbage til senere. Men først så lige sådan en indflyvning i, hvorfor det overhovedet handler om systemtænkning. Og det var fordi, det var et projekt om teknologisk dannelse, som jo på mange måder handler om, at børnene skulle have en fornemmelse af, at teknologi jo ikke er noget, der sådan er isoleret, men altid på en eller anden måde er en del af menneskeskabte systemer. Og jeg har Kjeld Nielsens citat med her, hvor der jo står, at det handler jo om både at kunne anvende og forvalte, vurdere og forstå teknologi, men også at forstå, hvordan det skabes, og hvordan teknologi påvirker samfundet, og hvordan samfundet påvirker teknologi. Og for at forstå det, så var vi inde og arbejde med kompetencerne kritisk tænkning hos eleverne og handlekompetence. Og i det arbejde gik det op for os, at vi kunne ikke, det var nødvendigt at arbejde med systemtænkning for at kunne tage stilling til nogle af de her ting og handle på dem. Så på den måde blev systemtænkning grundlag for de 2 andre kompetencer. Så det her med at kunne gå ind og identificere og analysere, vurdere og redesigne systemer, var en måde at arbejde med kritisk tænkning og handlekompetence. Så de ting så vi som en del af samme sag. Så tog vi systemtænkning og skar ned i 4 mål i sådan en simpel taksonomi i den her kompetencemodel. Både som planlægningsværktøj, men også for at kunne gå ind og vurdere, hvornår der er tale om systemtænkning, og hvornår ser vi en udvikling, en progression i systemtænkning hos eleverne. Og den her model identificerer, analyserer, vurderer og redesigne, den går så igen igennem hele forløbet. Og I kan se, i modellen er der konkrete tegn på, hvad vi mente, vi skulle holde øje med, for at se progression hos eleverne. Og vi lavede et forløb, fordi, okay, hvordan laver man teknologisk dannende undervisning? Der trak vi på en masse forskellige greb. Men det blev et engineering forløb, et PBL engineering design forløb i 3. klasse over 12 lektioner, hvor kriteriet var bundet op på noget omkring bæredygtighed. Og vi tog udgangspunkt i elevernes hverdag, så det blev transporten omkring deres egen skole, som de skulle tage udgangspunkt i. Altså hvordan kommer afdeling A, det er indskolingsafdelingen, hvordan vil den afdeling kunne komme mere bæredygtigt i skole. Og det gjorde vi for at skabe aktive børn, der skulle tage ansvar for processen og alle de her ting, men også for, at der var mulighed for at komme med flere forskellige løsningsforslag til systemet omkring skolen. Og det blev så stiliseret ud fra den her Lars Brian Krogs PBL Engineering model, som I kan se. Og her er et lille blik på, på forløbet, som man også kan hente ned, hvis man vil se det fulde forløb. Men den første fase af forløbet, forstå problemet, blev bygget op af en frekvens af aktiviteter, der skulle lære børnene at tænke systemisk. Og først kom det til at handle om, hvad er transportteknologi overhovedet? Og der kan I se nogle børn, der leger sådan en mime-gætteleg, hvor de skulle agere transportteknologier selv. Så tog vi med udgangspunkt i gruppetegninger bæredygtighedsbegrebet ind, så børnene fik talt sig ind på, at hvad mente de bæredygtighed var i forhold til transportteknologier. Og derefter så tog de transportteknologier, som de lige havde leget, og så graderede de dem til en slags bæredygtighedsstratego. Og der kan I se, der er nogle børn, der løber og leger ude på legepladsen. Og det blev deres eget pointsystem og deres egne kriterier for, hvad der var bæredygtigt, og hvad der var mindre eller mere bæredygtigt. Derefter så brugte vi SAFO på den måde, at vi tog udgangspunkt i cykler, og børnene startede med at zoome helt ind på cykler og undersøgte dem, hvad for nogle delelementer sådan et cykelsystem består af, og hvilken funktion de forskellige delelementer har, og hvad vil der ske, hvis de her ting manglede. Og så zoomede vi ud på systemet, på cykelsystemet, til det omkringliggende stisystem på skolen. Og der fik børnene til opgave at gå på skattejagt efter nye elementer, som påvirker cykelsystemet. Og det var en kæmpe aha-oplevelse for eleverne. Nu har vi lige talt om det her med at gøre det usynlige synligt, eller i nogle af I har. Men det blev meget tydeligt for børnene, hvad de skulle kigge efter. Og man så dem, altså de udråbte lygtepæl, cykelstativer, asfalt. Altså de fik virkelig, det udviklede sig lidt til en sådan slags skattejagt, fordi de kunne se fidusen ved, hvordan de skulle kigge. Og det vi så gjorde bagefter, vent lidt, Lykke. Det var, så gik vi ind i klassen og zoomede ud på et kort over hele cykelsystemet omkring skolen. Og den sidste del i den her systemtænkningsfrekvens, det var, at de skulle lave rollespil. De skulle agere altså transportsystemer. Og der ser I et billede af nogle børn, der laver en lille fremtræden, et lille rollespil, hvor de selv er elementer i et transportsystem. Så skulle deres klassekammerater gætte, hvad for nogle delelementer i systemet de var. Og så pillede vi ved systemet. Vi skiftede hende, der var baglygte. Hun blev til asfalt eller andre tossede ting. Og så kunne de ret nemt gennemskue konsekvenser ved at ændre på systemerne. Så der kan man sige, at vi er inde og se progression på alle 4 niveauer af systemtænkning hos eleverne her. Nu må du gerne skifte. Så på med systembrillerne, spotte, hvad påvirker sådan nogle systemer, og hvordan kan vi pille ved dem, lærte de ligesom i den første sekvens. Næste del, udforsk feltet, gik de så ind og lavede en undersøgelse af hele indskolingens transportvaner, og det lavede de simpel statistik over. Og så skulle de så sætte de her resultater i relation til problemstillingen. Og fordi de dagen forinden havde leget super meget, og det har været en lille smule tosset at lege transportsystemer, så var stemningen sådan ret fantasifuld og legende stadigvæk. Og det er så her i den brainstorm med deres lærer, at de begynder at komme med alle mulige skøre forslag til, hvordan man kan påvirke transportsystemer omkring skolen ved for eksempel at fjerne parkeringspladsen helt. Og der opstod også sådan en aha-oplevelse hos børnene, at de simpelthen kunne fantasere om systemet og få lov til at komme med alle mulige skøre ting. Så den her idégenereringsproces, den ledte så over i den sidste del af forløbet, som hedder løs problemer. Og her skulle børnene arbejde med prototyper på løsningsforslag og modellere dem. Og der skete et skift fra det lidt tossede idégenerering til en mere realistisk, nogle mere realistiske forslag. Og hvis vi tager billederne en af gangen, så kommer der så det første billede, hvor der står cykellejeaftaler. Det var simpelthen en liste, hvor man kunne opskrive, hvis man søgte en cykellejeaftale, og så fordi hvis man en cykelaftale efter skole, så var man jo tvunget til at cykle i skole. Det var sådan lidt en måde at få folk til at cykle mere, og dermed være mere bæredygtige. Modellen nedenunder, det er en gårute fra børnenes hjem, som man kunne følges. Og det er en model oppe i højre, øverst til højre. Det er konkurrencer, så man pointskala, hvis man har cyklet mange gange, eller gået mange gange, eller stået på løbehjul mange gange, så kan man vinde de her konkurrencer. Og de to lige nedenunder, den til venstre, er en parkoursbane, hvor børnene forsøger at nudge skolekammeraterne til at cykle, for hvis det er sjovere at cykle i skole, fordi der er en parkoursbane, så kan det være, at der er flere, der gør det. Og den sidste er mødesteder omkring skolen, hvor man kan mødes med sine venner og følges i skolen. Så her med de her prototyper, der kunne vi tydeligt se, at børnene i deres samtaler identificerer, analyserer, vurderer, men de går også ind og piller og redesigner ved det eksisterende system, og vigtigst af alt ser de deres egen rolle i systemet og tager ansvar for fællesskabet. Ja. Og hvis jeg sådan skal opsamle, så er der 2 vigtige ting her at sige, at det var faktisk ret nemt at lære børn at tænke systemisk. Vi skulle bare lære dem det ved at bruge nogle sådan vigtige didaktiske greb, vil jeg sige, men selvfølgelig også sætte det ind i en faglig ramme, der gav mening. Dels at det var nærmiljøet, og det var bæredygtighed, der blev omdrejningspunktet, og deres egne oplevelser og erfaringer. Men det med, at der var mange, der var åbne for forskellige løsningsforslag, altså det var problembaseret, vi gjorde det legende, og det blev fantasifuldt, og vi brugte nogle kropslige greb i forhold til det her med at visualisere systemet som rollespil. Det gjorde, at det overhovedet ikke var svært for børnene at forstå. Og det krævede også en lærer, som var villig til at gå med på, at det blev lidt tosset, og alle forslag var okay, og de måtte godt køre en stemning op og være lidt kreative. Og det lykkedes han med, ikke? Og på den måde synes vi, at hvis vi når dertil, at vi kan få børnene til at se de her systemer, lege med dem, pille ved dem, vurdere dem, redesigne dem, så er vi nået ret langt i forhold til at give dem mulighed for kritisk stillingtagen og også faktisk at kunne handle på nogle af problemerne. Så den her taksonomi, som er jo super simpel, tænker vi kan være sådan, kan bruges både sådan i planlægningssammenhænge, men også være værktøj til formativ evaluering af børnene eller summativ. Ja, så er der 2 spørgsmål, jeg stiller her til sidst, hvis det er noget, I har lyst til at diskutere. Hvordan passer systemer ind i jeres felt, og hvordan arbejder I med det? Og det ved jeg ikke, om det er relevant at diskutere nu, eller om der er spørgsmål eller kommentarer.
Tak, Mette. Jeg synes virkelig, det var interessant at se, hvordan et system kunne udmønte sig i 3. klasse. Inden der lige bliver stillet et spørgsmål, så vil jeg bare lige kommentere og sige, at nogle af de der pointer, som Jonas blandt andet havde omkring, hvordan man gør det usynlige synligt, det synes jeg, vi ser nogle gode eksempler på her. En af mine bekymringer med systemtænkning, når man skal arbejde med det i folkeskolen, det er også det der med, hvordan får vi indsigt? Altså, hvordan evaluerer man? Jeg synes faktisk, du illustrerer meget fint med dit eksempel, hvordan man har nogle tegn, man kan kigge efter i forhold til nogle forskellige mål, man sætter op. Ja, det var bare lige en indledende kommentar. Nu kan jeg se, at vi har allerede to kommentarer eller spørgsmål. Maria?
Jeg vil lige Martin. Særligt det med at lave rollespil og få lov til at tosse lidt ud i sådan et legetransportsystem, som de her børn jo aldrig har været udsat for før. Den leg, den gav, altså selvom den jo var uden ord, så gav det bare kæmpe stor indsigt i, hvordan børnene tænkte. Og hvordan de så tingene interagere med hinanden, og særligt når vi pillede det.
Og det er jo ofte, så kan man sige, når man har muligheden for at visualisere nogle af processerne, altså noget af det usynlige, så får man også et bedre udgangspunkt for at evaluere elevernes læring. Så det synes jeg, du har set meget rigtigt der. Ja, tak.
Jeg vil give et andet eksempel på, hvordan man kan visualisere det. Jeg har arbejdet med børn omkring økosystemer, men jo på samme måde her, hvor det handler om, hvordan de forskellige elementer interagerer. Og der satte vi simpelthen elastikker op imellem børnene. Så hvis de så, at bien og blomsten var forbundet, så fik de en elastik, de kunne stå og mærke hinanden i, og så fik vi bygget sådan et helt edderkoppespind af elementer, der interagerede i systemet. Det var sådan en anden krop at gøre det på.
Det er meget, meget fint illustreret. Ja, nu må vi hellere lade Maria kommentere eller stille spørgsmål. Ja.
Tak for det. Tak for fine oplæg. Jeg tænker, Mette, nu I har givet sådan et eksempel i 3. klasse med transportsystemer, og Jonas havde det her, og en måde at fastholde elevernes viden er for eksempel med at lege det, eller med de elastikker, du snakker om i økosystemet. Og Jonas havde et eksempel, hvor de tegnede, altså det er også en måde at fastholde deres forståelse af. Men der må alligevel være nogle begrænsninger for, hvilke systemer, der kan arbejdes med i grundskolen. Så har I, altså hvor den der transfer, så nu har eleverne fundet en forståelse af transportsystemer, og måske økosystemer, men er der nogle eksempler på, eller har I undersøgt, om de kan overføre det til andre systemer, og er der nogen, der ligger sådan særligt for? Altså...
Ja, nej, det har vi ikke. Det var jo første iteration, kan vi sige,
ja.
I projektet, og det var jo en del af studiet, så det har vi ikke undersøgt yderligere. Her var bæredygtig transport jo oplagt, fordi det var en skole, der i forvejen havde et stisystem omkring skolen. Det er ikke sikkert, at det havde fungeret på samme måde på andre skoler. Men nej, så det har vi ikke, men det kunne være rigtig spændende at undersøge.
Ja, fordi jeg tænker også, når du snakkede om det her på tværs af fag, altså særligt i grundskolen, at hvis man som team for eksempel arbejder med og visualiserer forskellige systemer, så kunne det jo godt være, at man også kunne kigge på systemet, når de havde madkundskab, eller når de havde, jeg ved ikke, om man kan gøre det i dansk, men altså, at man fik den der tænkning i, at systemer hænger sammen, og de findes overalt, hvor vi færdes.
Ja, helt sikkert. Jeg tror, det vigtige er, at børnene får noget at binde det op på.
Ja.
Altså, ligesom her var det bæredygtighed, så de har noget at vurdere systemerne ud fra. Og så vil man kunne tage fødevarer, alle mulige andre temaer ind over det. Det kan også være, at man kan binde det op på noget andet end bæredygtighed. Men her fungerede det i hvert fald.
Meget spændende. Tak for det.
Selv tak.
Jonas, du har en spørgsmål eller en kommentar?
Jag har en kort kommentar. Tack så mycket, Mette. Det var jättespännande. Väldigt intressant. Det finns många likheter mellan de 3 presentationerna, fast de är på olika nivåer i utbildningssystemet. Verkligen intressant. Det enda jag vill kommentera det är att du har med redesign i din progression eller din typologi. Och det är väldigt intressant, för det har inte vi haft med riktigt, utan vi tänkte mer förståelse, att förstå tekniska system. Men egentligen så borde också redesign vara med. Det är något som jag tar med mig som jag ska fundera på också. Design kanske är för svårt, men redesign, att hitta aspekter man kan ändra i systemet, det är väldigt spännande. Yes, tack.
Selv tak. Og det fungerede så fint for børnene, fordi det tog udgangspunkt i deres egen virkelighed, og havde et formål, som de gerne ville ændre på, og så sig selv i. Det synes jeg.
Og hvis jeg lige må kommentere, ja, det havde jeg slet ikke været opmærksom på, men det er jo fordi, jeg binder jo teknologiundervisning meget sammen med engineering, som vi jo også har arbejdet med på STEM-kandidatuddannelsen. Og der taler vi om redesign i den iteration, hvor man forbedrer den prototype, man er i gang med at udvikle. Men jeg tror faktisk, altså det er rigtig interessant, det som Jonas egentlig peger på, og som du egentlig har, eller som I har arbejdet med det er den her med, at jamen, man har en eksisterende teknologi eller et system, og hvordan kan man forbedre den så? Det er jo et rigtig interessant didaktisk spørgsmål, man kan stille til børn. Altså, hvordan kan vi forbedre noget, ikke? Altså, det er jo en god måde at tage udgangspunkt i noget på, eller tage udgangspunkt i et systemproblem, kan man sige. Ja,
og det ligger i hvert fald meget op til noget handlekraft, ikke? At
jo,
vi kan
det gør det.
Og pille ved det her, og påvirke det, som vi synes, det giver mening.
Ja, der ligger en handlekompetence i det. Absolut. I høj grad. Godt. Fantastisk. Mette, jeg slår lige over i engelsk, så vi lige kan sige pænt ordentligt farvel. So thank you to all the presenters. I think we are close to finishing now. If we have a decay rate, the Zoom meeting will be empty in 20 minutes. But so I think we will stop now. Thank you, Jonas, Rea, Løkke, and Mette for your presentations. I think they were valuable contributions to a discourse in Denmark about system thinking in technology and science education. I hope, Jonas, Rea, Løkke, and Mette, that you will send the presentations, maybe a PDF file to me, and then I will make sure that all the participants will get an email with the presentation. So thank you again very much for presenting this novel aspect in relation to schools. So I think we will stop now, and yeah, thank you for participating.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Get in touch if anyone's interested. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Ja,
Bye bye.
hej.